Daniel adjusted his worn-out jacket as he stepped out of the small bakery, balancing a paper bag filled with discounted bread in one hand and his daughter's tiny hand in the other. The cold wind bit at his face, but nothing mattered more than making sure Lily had something to eat tonight. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Lily murmured, her big brown eyes looking up at him. "I know, sweetheart. We'll have dinner soon," Daniel assured her, squeezing her hand. He was already calculating how to stretch the little food he had left at home. As they walked down the busy street, something caught his eye, a sleek black leather wallet lying on the pavement near a cafe. It looked expensive, too expensive for this part of town. Daniel sighed, glancing around. Whoever had lost it was probably panicking. Bending down, he picked it up and flipped it open. Cash, credit cards, and an ID with a striking woman's picture stared back at him. Lena Whitmore. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Daddy, are we keeping it?" Lily asked innocently. "No, sweetheart, it's not ours," Daniel said firmly, tucking the wallet into his pocket. "We're going to find the owner." Lily nodded as if it made perfect sense, and Daniel couldn't help but feel a pang of pride. He might not be able to provide the world for her, but at least he could teach her right from wrong. Following the address on the ID, Daniel found himself in front of a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of the city. It was intimidatingly luxurious, the kind of place where men in sharp suits and women in designer heels walked with an air of importance. He hesitated. This was a mistake. People like him didn't belong in places like this. But before he could turn away, a woman in a crisp suit stepped out of the revolving doors. She looked frustrated, hurried, desperate. Lena Whitmore. Daniel recognized her immediately from the picture in the wallet, but in real life she was even more striking, poised, elegant, completely out of his league. She was rummaging through her bag, mumbling under her breath when Daniel stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat. "Are you looking for this?" Lena's head snapped up, her blue eyes locking onto the wallet in his outstretched hand. For a moment, she just stared at him, and then relief flooded her face. "Oh my God," she exhaled, grabbing it from him. "I thought I lost it forever." She flipped it open, checking inside. "Everything's here." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "Thank you. You have no idea how much trouble this just saved me." Daniel gave a small nod, already feeling out of place in front of her. "No problem. Just doing the right thing." Lena studied him then, her gaze flicking to Lily, who was gripping his hand tightly. Something softened in her expression. "Let me repay you," she said. "You could have kept it, but you didn't. That deserves something." Daniel shook his head. "That's not necessary." Lena frowned. "It is to me." Before he could argue, she reached into her wallet, pulling out a stack of crisp bills. "Here, please take it." Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to say yes. He needed to say yes. But his pride wouldn't let him. "I didn't do it for money," he said, stepping back. "Have a good night." He turned, leading Lily away before she could protest. But as he walked off, Lena found herself staring after him. Who was this man? In her world, people only returned things when there was something in it for them. But he had refused her money without hesitation. She glanced down at the little girl beside him, Lily, he had called her. The child's coat looked thin for the weather, and the man's shoes were battered. They were struggling. Lena had spent her entire life surrounded by people who would do anything for money. Yet this man had walked away from it without a second thought. For the first time in a long while, she was intrigued, and Lena Whitmore didn't ignore things that intrigued her. Lena sat at her desk, staring at the towering stack of reports in front of her, but her mind was elsewhere. She tapped her pen against the polished mahogany surface, replaying the brief encounter outside her office building. The man who had returned her wallet, Daniel, he hadn't wanted anything in return. That alone was rare. Rarer still was the way he had looked at her, not with expectation or calculation, but with quiet dignity. He had refused her money, as if keeping his pride intact was worth more than the crisp bills she had offered. Lena wasn't used to being ignored. In her world, people clamored for her attention, desperate to impress or gain favor. And yet, Daniel had walked away without a second thought. She swiveled in her chair and picked up her phone. Find out everything you can about a man named Daniel. She paused, realizing she didn't even know his last name. He has a young daughter. Start there. An hour later, a file landed on her desk. The contents made her chest tighten. Daniel Carter. Formerly an architect at a mid-sized firm before it had gone under 2 years ago. Since then, he had taken whatever jobs he could find: construction, delivery driving, even janitorial work. A single father, no known family to help him, barely making ends meet. Lena exhaled slowly. He wasn't just a man with a good heart. He was a man who had been dealt a difficult hand and was doing everything he could to survive. She wasn't sure what drove her to action, only that she was already dialing her assistant. Set up a meeting with Carter, she instructed. Her assistant hesitated. Would you like me to contact him directly? No, Lena said, thinking. I'll handle it myself. The next afternoon, Daniel was finishing up a shift at a construction site when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. He barely glanced up, assuming it was some executive checking on the project, until the driver's door opened and Lena Whitmore stepped out. Construction workers paused mid-task, their eyes darting between Daniel and the impeccably dressed woman making her way toward him. Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead, confused. What are you doing here? Lena stopped in front of him, ignoring the curious stares. I need to talk to you. Daniel crossed his arms. If this is about the wallet again, it's not. She tilted her head, studying him. I looked into you. His jaw tightened. You what? I needed to know who you were, she said simply. And I found out you used to be an architect. Daniel's stance stiffened. That part of his life felt like it belonged to someone else now. Lena continued, undeterred. I have a business proposal for you. Daniel let out a sharp breath. I'm not interested. You haven't even heard what it is. I don't need to, he said firmly. I know how this works. You feel bad, so you want to throw me a bone. I don't take handouts. Lena's lips pressed together. This isn't charity, it's an opportunity. She pulled out a business card and held it out. Meet me tomorrow at this address. If you're not interested after hearing me out, I won't bother you again. Daniel hesitated, then reluctantly took the card. Lena stepped back. I'll see you tomorrow. She turned and walked away, leaving Daniel standing there, the weight of her offer settling over him. The next day, Daniel found himself in front of a towering building, far grander than anywhere he had set foot in years. He entered the lobby, feeling every pair of eyes on him as he approached the receptionist. A moment later, he was being led to a sleek office where Lena was waiting. She gestured for him to sit. I need someone with your skills. Daniel leaned back, skeptical. Why me? You could hire anyone. Because you have talent, she said simply. And you haven't let the world make you bitter. That's rare. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the temptation gnawing at him. He wanted to provide a better life for Lily, but working for someone like Lena. He wasn't sure if stepping into her world was a mistake. Lena watched him carefully. One chance, Carter, that's all I'm offering. Daniel exhaled, gripping the arms of the chair. Against all logic, he found himself saying, Fine, I'll hear you out. Daniel sat across from Lena in the sleek, glass-walled office, his hands folded over his knee, his expression unreadable. He still wasn't sure why he was here. The woman across from him was composed, her posture effortlessly refined as she watched him with an intensity that made him uneasy. Lena clasped her hands together on the polished desk. She wasn't accustomed to having to convince anyone of anything. People usually jumped at the opportunity to work for her. But Daniel Carter wasn't like anyone she had met before. I want you to design a building, she said, her voice smooth but firm. Daniel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I haven't worked as an architect in years. I know, Lena acknowledged, but talent doesn't disappear. You just haven't had the opportunity to use it. He glanced out the floor to ceiling windows, the city sprawling beneath them. He had once dreamed of being the kind of man who built things that lasted. But those dreams had been buried under bills, long hours of manual labor, and the relentless need to provide for his daughter. Lena leaned slightly forward, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not offering you a pity job, Daniel. I've seen your past work. It's good, better than good. I need someone who thinks outside the standard corporate mold, and you do." His jaw clenched. "And what if I fail?" She raised a brow. "Then you fail." "But I don't think you will." Daniel drummed his fingers against the arm of his chair. He had spent so long scraping by, taking whatever job he could to keep Lily safe and fed. Could he really step back into the world he had left behind? "And if I say yes," he asked, his voice quieter now. Lena didn't hesitate. "Then I'll set you up with everything you need: an office, a team, resources. You'll be paid well." The thought of financial stability sent a wave of relief through him, but he forced himself to remain skeptical. "You barely know me. Why take a risk on me?" She studied him for a long moment before answering. "Because you're honest. Because you returned my wallet when you didn't have to. And because I think you deserve another chance." Daniel hesitated, then finally nodded. "All right, I'll do it." A flicker of satisfaction passed through Lena's eyes, but she didn't gloat. Instead, she stood and extended her hand. "Welcome aboard." He shook it, the simple gesture carrying more weight than he expected. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel found himself stepping into a world he had once thought was lost to him. His days were now filled with blueprints, meetings, and discussions about structure and design. It was overwhelming at times, but he couldn't deny the thrill of creating again. Lena was a constant presence, demanding, intelligent, and sharper than anyone he had ever worked with. She didn't tolerate half measures, and she challenged him in ways that both frustrated and motivated him. One evening, as the office emptied out and the city lights flickered to life outside, Daniel remained at his desk, frowning over a set of architectural plans. Lena appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Still here?" Daniel glanced up, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wanted to refine this section before tomorrow's meeting." She walked in, setting a coffee down in front of him before perching on the edge of his desk. "You don't have to prove anything, you know." Daniel let out a dry laugh. "Feels like I do." Lena tilted her head slightly. "To who?" He hesitated. "Myself," she nodded, as if she understood more than she let on. "You're doing good work, Daniel." He looked at her then, really looked at her. She wasn't just some untouchable CEO anymore. She was a woman who saw things in people that they couldn't always see in themselves. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like maybe, just maybe, he was becoming the man he had once dreamed of being. Daniel's hands were steady as he traced a final line across the blueprint, satisfaction settling in his chest. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of late nights and intense discussions, but now the project was coming together. It was his work, something he had created from the ground up. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. A glance at the large windows told him it was late, the city outside humming with life beneath a blanket of soft yellow lights. He hadn't even noticed the office emptying around him. A quiet voice broke his thoughts. "You're still here." Lena stood in the doorway, her hair no longer in its usual pristine waves but slightly tousled, as if she had been running her fingers through it all evening. She held a glass of something dark and expensive in one hand, her other hand tucked into the pocket of her tailored trousers. Daniel exhaled a small laugh. "So are you." She stepped inside, her heels muffled against the plush carpet. "I was going through reports. But then I noticed the lights on in your office." She tilted her head, her eyes flicking over the scattered papers on his desk. "You've been working nonstop." He shrugged. "I want this to be perfect." Lena set her glass down on the edge of his desk, then leaned against it, her gaze softening. "It already is." Something in her voice made him pause. In the beginning, she had been all sharp edges and unshakable resolve, but now there was warmth in the way she looked at him, something unspoken lingering between them. Daniel cleared his throat, pushing back the sudden tightness in his chest. I should probably head home. Lena hesitated, then reached into the pocket of her blazer and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Before you go, I wanted to give you this. He took it, unfolding it carefully, his brow furrowed as he read the address written in neat, precise handwriting. What is this? Her lips curved slightly. A new apartment, for you and Lily. Daniel's breath caught. He looked up, searching her face. Lena, it's not charity, she interrupted, her tone firm but gentle. It's part of your contract. Consider it a signing bonus. His fingers tightened around the paper. The thought of moving his daughter into a place where heat wouldn't be a constant worry, where she wouldn't have to hear cars rushing past her bedroom window at all hours, it was overwhelming. But more overwhelming was the fact that Lena had thought of this, that she had done it for him. He swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. Lena's expression softened even further. Then don't say anything. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with something neither of them dared name. Then, before he could stop himself, Daniel spoke. Why are you doing this? Lena's breath hitched slightly, but she didn't look away. Because I care. The words settled deep in his chest, unraveling something inside him. He had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of survival on his shoulders, never allowing himself to hope for more. But now, there was Lena. And she wasn't just offering him a job. She was offering him something far more dangerous, something that felt a lot like love. Daniel took a slow step closer, his fingers brushing against the edge of the desk. Lena. She exhaled softly, her gaze searching his. Don't overthink it, Carter. But he already was, because this was crossing a line, one he wasn't sure he could come back from. And yet, when Lena reached out, her fingers grazing his, he didn't pull away. Instead, he let himself fall. And for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of the landing. Daniel wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere between late nights spent refining blueprints and quiet moments where Lena let her guard down, something had shifted. He noticed it in the way she lingered after meetings, her gaze holding his just a second longer than necessary. In the small gestures, like how she always made sure there was an extra cup of coffee on his desk in the mornings, or how she subtly rearranged her schedule to accommodate his. And he felt it in himself, too. The way his pulse quickened when she walked into the room, the way his thoughts drifted to her even when he was home with Lily. But acknowledging it, saying it out loud, was dangerous. Lena Whitmore belonged to a world that had never been his. And yet here she was, inching closer into his life, leaving her mark in places he hadn't expected. Daniel stepped into his new apartment, the one Lena had arranged, and set his keys on the counter. The space still felt unfamiliar, but it was warm, safe, a place where Lily could finally have more than just the bare minimum. She came running out of her bedroom, her excitement palpable. Daddy, look, I made a drawing for Miss Lena. He took the crayon-covered paper from her small hands, his chest tightening at the sight of it. A rough sketch of 3 figures, him, Lily, and Lena, all holding hands. Daniel swallowed hard. Lily had noticed it too. The next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to clear his head before the day truly began. But when he stepped inside, he found Lena already there, standing by the window, staring out at the city with an expression he couldn't quite read. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, something flickering across her face, something unguarded. You're here early, she said. So are you. Lena hesitated for a fraction of a second before gesturing towards a folder on her desk. I wanted to go over something with you. Daniel crossed the room, taking the document she offered. His eyes scanned the page, but he could barely focus. Not when she was standing so close, her presence an undeniable force beside him. Lily made you something, he said, his voice quieter than usual as he pulled the drawing from his pocket and handed it to her. Lena took it carefully, her fingers brushing his in the process. She stared at the child's artwork, her expression softening in a way that made Daniel's stomach twist. She included me, Lena murmured. Daniel nodded. She likes you. Lena's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but instead she traced the edges of the paper with her fingertips. I like her too. Silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. Daniel knew he should step back, create distance before things became too complicated. But instead, he found himself speaking words he hadn't planned. You didn't have to do all of this for me. The job, the apartment, everything. Lena lifted her gaze to his, something raw and real shining in her expression. I wanted to. His breath felt shallow. Why? She took a step closer, just enough that he could see the way her pulse fluttered at the base of her throat. Because you matter to me, Daniel. The words hit him like a force he hadn't been ready for. For so long, he had been the one who carried everything: responsibility, struggle, survival. And now, here was Lena, standing before him, offering something he hadn't dared hope for. Daniel reached up, gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Lena didn't move away. If anything, she leaned into his touch, her breath hitching slightly. I'm not sure what this is, he admitted. Lena's lips curved just barely. Neither am I. But in that moment, neither of them needed an answer, because whatever this was, it was real, and neither of them were ready to let it go. Daniel stood in the quiet of Lena's office, his fingers still tingling from where they had brushed against her skin. The weight of her words, "You matter to me," hung between them, shifting something deep inside him. For so long, he had been alone in his struggles, never expecting anyone to step into his life with genuine care. But Lena had. She watched him closely, her expression guarded but hopeful, as if waiting for him to push her away or pull her closer. He wasn't sure which one he wanted more. Before he could say anything, a sharp knock sounded at the door, breaking the fragile moment. A junior executive stepped inside, oblivious to the tension in the air, and handed Lena a file. She took it with a nod, her face slipping effortlessly back into the composed mask of the CEO. Daniel exhaled, stepping back. The world outside their private moments still existed, and it was a stark reminder of who she was, who he was. The next few days passed in a blur of work, but the undercurrent between them remained. The way Lena's gaze would linger on his when they discussed blueprints, the way her breath would hitch slightly when he stood too close. It was a dance, unspoken but undeniable. One evening, as Daniel was packing up for the night, Lena appeared in his doorway. This time, she wasn't holding a file or a cup of coffee. I want to show you something, she said. He hesitated only for a second before nodding. They drove through the city in her car, the hum of the engine the only sound between them, until she pulled up to a construction site. Daniel frowned as he stepped out, recognizing the lot. It had been abandoned for years, an ambitious project that had been shelved before it could ever begin. Lena led him through the gates, past the skeletal remains of what could have been something great. She stopped near the center, turning to face him. This was supposed to be a community space, she said. Affordable housing, small businesses, a park. But the investors pulled out, and no one wanted to take the risk. Daniel glanced around, his mind already working through the possibilities. You want to revive it. I want us to. The words made his pulse jump. Lena crossed her arms, watching him carefully. You said you wanted to create something that mattered. This is it. Daniel looked at the empty lot again, but this time he didn't just see broken concrete and abandoned steel beams. He saw potential. He saw a future, and he saw it with her. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. She tensed for only a moment before letting out a breath, her grip tightening around his. This is crazy, he murmured, Lena's lips curved slightly. Maybe, but tell me you don't want to do this, he exhaled. I do, and he wasn't just talking about the project. That night, something shifted between them. There were no more unspoken words, no more hesitations. When Daniel kissed Lena for the first time, it wasn't tentative, it was certain, a collision of two people who had been fighting against the inevitable for too long. Lena tasted like promise and risk, and for once in his life, Daniel wasn't afraid to take it. Weeks turned into months, and the project became more than just blueprints and contracts. It became a dream they were building together, Long days spent on site, late nights spent reviewing plans. Lena had always been formidable, but Daniel saw the side of her few, did the way she fought for things she cared about, the quiet moments when she let herself be vulnerable with him. And Daniel had become more than just a man trying to survive. He was creating again, thriving in ways he hadn't thought possible. One evening, as they stood on the nearly completed site, Lena turned to him, a rare softness in her eyes. "I never expected this," she admitted. "Not just the project." "Us?" Daniel reached for her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Neither did I." She exhaled a quiet laugh. "But I don't regret it. Neither do I." The next morning, Daniel walked into the office with something in his pocket, a small, velvet box that felt heavier than it should. By the time the sun set, he was on one knee in the middle of the site they had built together, Lena's hands trembling as she covered her mouth. "Yes," she whispered before he could even finish asking, and just like that, they weren't just building a future for others. They were building one for themselves. Months later, beneath a sky full of stars, Lena walked down an aisle lined with soft golden lights, her eyes locked on Daniel's. Lily stood beside him, grinning as she held onto Lena's bouquet, and when Lena reached him, Daniel took her hands, his voice steady and full of certainty. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "But you showed me that I could." Lena's eyes shimmered. "We built this together." And as they exchanged vows, surrounded by the life they had created, Daniel knew this wasn't just a happy ending. It was the beginning of everything.